they'll say, you're here now, you're in Attica. We are the bosses. You do what we tell you. When we tell you to walk, you walk. When we tell you to eat, you eat. When we tell you to sleep, you sleep. When we tell you not to talk, we don't talk. They don't look at us like human beings. Meanwhile, they are the ones that are the animals.
And it functions you in a capacity as more or less like a vegetable, because you're not able to think anymore, because you're told what to do and when to do and how often to do it. Right? Yeah, I don't think that any sane person can tolerate it. I don't care who you are. You're looking for humane treatment. That's all. Humane treatment. We are given a bath once a week, very briefly, once a week. You see, these things, you're taking away the bare necessities, things that a man needs to feel like he's a human being. These are taken away. You don't have them. I don't know. I try not to be bitter, you see. Dealing with these people, trying to be bitter. But I don't know, everything they do is designed to destroy you, dehumanize you, make you a complete nothing. So when God come in here and he tell me to do something, now I'll do it. But now at the same time, if I feel that he's wrong and I'm right, there's nothing that they can do to me, and this includes having that last shovel of dirt in my face. They did everything but that. You understand? That's going to change my mind. And this is what I think the attitude of most inmates in there.
For some time, we've all been concerned about this trouble that was brewing in the prison. You could feel it in the air. Anybody that works in a prison or institution could feel things like that in the air. You knew something is brewing. We're all apprehensive, but you can't tell when it's going to happen. Every night we expected it.
I don't think nobody would intentionally try to provoke an incident, because they realize that they don't have a chance. But at the same time, like, you just can't keep presenting that garbage and expect somebody to take it.
We had a beautiful society in the yard, you know, because basically we realized, you know, that all we had was each other, you know, so we clung to each other, despite of all our different ideologies, and there were 1,000 ideologies out there, you know, but they worked it out for the common good. Like, it was just about all of us together. You understand, all of us eating together, you know, like having to suffer together. You know, it was 4 days without bathing. You had to smell each other. 4 days of going hungry, sharing what you had amongst each other. It was really groovy, man, you know? Groovy in the sense that you know what it is to have unity. You dig? It was really a united thing. It was a thing where, you know, where we're going to do this, you know. It was nice. We might have a disagreement on it. But as to the thing as a whole, we're all together there.
There was no really racial tension, and everybody was looking out for each other, sharing food and sharing cigarettes and putting up things to sleep in and mattresses, you know, the whole organization. And it was just fantastic the way everybody worked together, you know. It was really beautiful.
All right, hey, let's move. Don't hold up the line. Let's move. Keep this line going here. Let's move it. Come on, let's move it. Right on. Hey. Come on, 38. Tell them we ain't dead. Tell them we ain't dead, bro. Can I hold this in? Tell them we ain't dead. Ain't nothing dead about us. We ain't gonna die. Nothing. We will not die in here.
And I want you brothers to get together, because we together here. And these people think we shucking and jiving, but we is for real.
Well, I thought things were bad down home. But I've never seen anything like this. The people in here are treated like dogs. Not only the black, the Puerto Rican, and the white. And we're going to get what we demand, or we're going to die trying.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Support us all the way. We're doing this for everybody.
We no longer wish to be treated as statistics. We want to be treated as human beings.
We are men. We are not beasts, and we do not intend to be driven or beaten as such. The entire prison populace has set forth to change forever the ruthless brutalization and disregard for the lives of the prisoners here and throughout the United States. What has happened here is but the sound before the fury of those who are oppressed.
My name is Arthur Eve, New York State Assemblyman. I went to Attica when hearing that the inmates there had captured a portion of the prison. It was very interesting to see how the men in that yard had set up a city within the confines of Attica State Prison. They had set up a very elaborate PA system so that all of the conversation between them and us was heard by all of the inmates in the yard. And no decisions were made unless all of the inmates agreed.
We want to apply the New York State minimum wage law to all state institutions. We want to stop to slave labor here. We want to allow all New York State prisoners to be politically active without intimidation or reprisals. We want true religious sanctity. We want to do our own thing in this place. Number 4, in all censorship of newspapers, magazines, letters, and other publications coming from the publisher. 5, allow all inmates at their own expense to communicate with anyone they please.
They were asking for better educational program, better training program, drug treatment program, library. They were asking for better food, better medical care. They were asking for more than 25 cents a day in salary.
Well, now I was in there early. I was one of the pool reporters who went in there. And some of the demands that they made were getting out of the country, etc. How would you characterize these? Are these realistic demands?
They have a list of what they call practical demands, which are 15 demands. Just about every one of them have to do with the improvement of prison conditions. This is not a riot of prisoners who are seeking to escape. It is a riot of prisoners who are eminently practical and who are spelling out conditions which they feel should be improved. And many of those conditions are requirements which are now in the existing law.
The incident did not happen because, the inmates were trying to stage dramatics. The incidents arose because of some, legitimate, shall we say, grievance that they had. And I think that how much headway, that comes of that will be just how, honest and frank, the authorities can face up to the situation they have.
Advocating violence. We are advocating communication and understanding.
question of
Right, good. Third, first, second, and third follow right along, Gary.
The New York State Police deployed to Attica 30 high-powered rifles and 232 riot guns. The State Police riot gun is a 12-gauge shotgun with a 20-inch barrel and a full choke. There were also members of the State Park Police present, as well as members from 11 sheriff's departments. There were also weapons from the arsenals of the Attica prison itself and weapons brought from Auburn by corrections officers who came from Auburn. These weapons included 22 high-powered Winchester rifles, at least a dozen 32 caliber pistols, and 2 weapons that are capable of automatic fire, the Colt model AR-15 and the Thompson submachine gun.
The decision that had to be made quickly when I arrived was, would I talk with them, or was there sufficient support to move in and retake the institution?
Now, the tradition in this area is not to negotiate, am I correct?
That's right.
And you made a decision that you would not only negotiate, but that you would actually go into the stronghold of the inmates and negotiate there.
Yes. I got a feeling that there might very well be enough people in that yard who would believe in me that we might be able to do some meaningful negotiating.
He started out being sincere, you know, all of a sudden he deviated. And he came out a brand new bag, you know, and I figured, like I said, that Dunbar and Mancusi, people like this here, and Rockefeller put pressure on him, you know, that he started playing the word game.
I myself, as an individual, had a lot of respect for Oswald, especially for the fact that a man of his position, you know, coming into a yard full of rebellious inmates, it takes a lot of guts. And I admired him for that, but he threw that down the drain because he came in and told the inmates something, you know, one thing, and he wasn't aware of the fact that we had television sets and radios, and we were watching what was going on outside that gate. And as soon as he walked out of the yard and walked out the front gate, there was a newsman that interviewed him there, and he asked Mr. Oswald, what do the inmates want and everything? And he changed it all around. He says, oh, they want the world, you know. He was very negative, and naturally the inmates didn't want him anymore. They couldn't, they figured they couldn't trust him. He wasn't a man of his word.
They trusted him the first day, you know, but everybody dug to change up in his manner.
Mr. Wicker, how did you happen to go to Attica during September?
My name had been included on a list of names that prisoners who were then in revolted Attica had asked to come and observe the proceedings there.
And when did you arrive at the Attica prison?
Late in the afternoon of Friday, September the 10th. I would suppose in retrospect it was about 4:30 in the afternoon.
I want to add my further testimony to the unity that's shown in the yard, to the unanimous testimony of these men that they regard themselves as being aggrieved by the treatment that they say that they have received in the prison in past years, and they appear to be unwilling to give up the hostages, give up their situation in the prison for anything short of a complete amnesty.
Now you had a situation in which the state was saying no amnesty, and the inmates said that they wanted total amnesty. What did you do about trying to prevent this confrontation that was looming up?
By midday Sunday, I think what most of us felt was that the attack was quite imminent. And it was coming because we had this deadlock. We weren't able to work out anything on amnesty and so forth. hence, about the only thing we could do, we thought, was to try to maintain the status quo, buy time, stall off the attack, and hope that somewhere along the line, either the prisoners or the state would yield in such a way that an agreement might yet be worked out. In other words, if we could just, we felt that the hostages were not going to be harmed.
You know, many of the people out there wanted to take out their old grievances on the hostages, which is understandable. There were many hostages there that I had previous grievances with. But these things became obsolete in my mind at that stage, because something much higher, you know, was at stake.
The hostages are, by their own testimony, are sleeping on mattresses, and the prisoners in most cases are on the ground. Hostages are getting what food there is. Hostages are getting medical care treatment. They all requested strongly that as much consideration as possible be given to granting full amnesty to the prisoners.
Treated all right?
Yes, I have so far. Been treated very good.
No complaints, but no problems so far?
So far, been treated very good.
The inmates here, the human beings here, have gone out of their way to see that we get what medical attention they can provide for us. They've seen that the serious injuries have been taken care of in the hospital. They've taken care of our food needs, and they've gone to all extremes, the farthest extremes that they could, to see that we were kept comfortable.
Did you
so the emphasis was much more nearly on preventing the attack by Sunday than it was on literally working out an agreement.
And is it fair to say that the emphasis was not on leaning on the inmates to accept what had been offered, but more on trying to get the governor or somebody else to give you the time?
That's right, because the inmates had no power to carry out an attack.
You did make a telephone call to the governor that day, am I correct?
Yes. We got him on the telephone at Tarrytown. I spoke to him first. I described the situation to him as best I could, and our apprehensions that the attack was going to be made and made very shortly, and our hope that he would prevent that, and that he would then come to Attica as at the invitation of the observers group. We made it very clear to him that we were not suggesting that he come up there pursuant to any demand by the prisoners, nor were we demanding that he come up and talk to the prisoners, nor meet with the prisoners in any way. We were suggesting that he come to Attica at our suggestion to meet with us.
Now we felt, and this was the agreement of all in the committee. It was my feeling, it was Senator Dunn's feeling, it was Tom Wicker's feelings, as well as Mr. Kenyatta, the young lords, and the whole group, from all the way from the extreme left to the right. We all felt that it was important for Governor Rockefeller to be there.
It would seem that it might be appropriate for someone as warm and understanding as Governor Rockefeller to walk that last mile and come.
It would be a suggestion to the prisoners themselves, at least a symbolic gesture to them, that the governor was concerned over what was happening, that he had some concern for their welfare and their fate and their safety, as well as those of the hostages, and that his actual physical presence at Attica would signify that to the prisoners. That was the first thing that I thought would happen. And secondly, that if he would prevent the attack and come up to Attica and take personal charge that way, we could then just maintain the status quo for 1, 2, 3 days, who knew how long, and at the end of that time, or at some point, while the question of amnesty and other points might not have been negotiable on Sunday, it might have been negotiable by Wednesday. All kinds of developments might have taken place that would have made a settlement possible.
Now, it is not true that we felt that the negotiations were fruitless and were coming to an end. It just isn't true, no matter what some of the committee members may say now. At that point, that was not the case. Every single one of the members of the Observer Committee at that point felt that there was value in additional negotiations.
There was no evidence in these negotiations that there was a real desire to settle, because all of these 28 offers had been made, and the position had hardened, not softened. So I then said, no, I would not come. I didn't think a useful purpose would be served.
We called in Commissioner Oswald, and we all pleaded with him to give us an additional day. We asked him to give us through yesterday at midnight. He turned that down too.
I also thought that we had a chance to hold it off, and if we still had their confidence. That's why we spent 5 hours, more or less, from the time we got out after supper on Sunday night with Oswald till about midnight, because I really believed, in one sense, that they wouldn't sacrifice the hostages.
I just hope that the commissioner and the other people in the committee that they've gathered together can come up with a solution to solve these people's problems and ours. Thank you very much.
I had, of course, asked to get out on television and perhaps talk. So I talked about the good treatment that we had got, and the medical help and the care, and then, of course, we hadn't been harmed up until then. And they said then at that time, do you want to talk to Governor Rockefeller? I said I'd be very happy to. And I don't just remember all my speech. It was off the cuff.
What you said was, Governor, we are here in the yard with quite a group of people, and everything that you can do, I am highly in support of. We lived for 4 days under the same conditions they are living in, and we are 38 men who understand exactly what they are trying to get for themselves. Now, it would seem a shame to waste a group of educated people like this. And then there was applause. So here we are, and we are waiting for your reply. That sound familiar?
That's just about it as I remember it. But one thing I especially remember, the inmates all clapped and shouted after. So I think they were thinking along the same lines I was thinking.
Which was what?
Which was that the waste of people out there. I mean, here was 38 of us, and perhaps we were going to die.
Sergeant Cunningham, now would you give us a message for Governor Nelson Rockefeller?
I certainly would. One of the recommendations is, and if he says no, I'm dead.
All right, that last squad. The last squad, kid. Right, as you were. Well, hey. All right, go right around to the supply truck and pick up the shotguns and rifles. On the double. Let's go. Come back in here.
So keep there.
You bring the gun for the bullets?
Well, what's more important? The lives of these people or the retaking of this institution? This institution is not important. It's lives that we're interested in hands. What's more important? Let the people in the world, let us know what you feel about this. We want to hear from you. We want some support from y'all.
But if we cannot live as people, then we will at least try to die like men. And nobody takes a weapon from you.
You're to meet force with force.
There have been some of the prison personnel severely injured here this morning, and we certainly don't want to see any of our people hurt. Any longer. To delay any longer would not only jeopardize innocent lives, but would threaten the security of the entire correctional of the state. Armed rebellion, the type we have faced, threatens the destruction of our free society. We cannot permit that destruction to happen.
At that point, the decision was made. There was no alternative but to go in. I supported that decision, and as Chief Executive Officer, I'm responsible for what happened to this day.
Place your hands on top of your head and surrender to an officer. I repeat, you will not be harmed.
Smell the blood and hear all the people screaming, and like at first they thought that they were shooting rubber bullets, and all these people started getting up and you'd see them getting blown apart.
The helicopter flew over and they told everybody to surrender. Guys put their hands on their heads, and when they said it's the second time, they just opened up shooting. I got my leg shot off. The state trooper walks over to me and says, "You won't rebel no more, will you, nigga?" And hit me in the leg with the gun butt, the one that was shot off. So the guy says, "Well, let's kill him." So the other guy says, "No, we're not gonna kill him. He's gonna bleed to death." The guys that got their shot in the head, some guys got their head, pieces of their head shot off in the chest, you know.
On the whole, man, this guy just laying all over, man. It's like a battlefield. Guys were just laying all over, man. They were like, they were shot all up, man, you know. They was trying to give up there, some of them, and they were just shot down, just like that.
I seen a bunch of people that's supposed to be human beings just shoot like they're shooting wild animals in a jungle. Cold-blooded surrender with his hand on his head, but he'd still be exposed to being killed.
I heard a guy holler out, you know, like, "Please don't kill me, don't kill me, don't kill me." And the guy told him to shut up. So he said, "Don't kill me." And they kept repeating. He said, "I said, shut the fuck up." So the guy kept saying it, and then I heard a shot ring out, and I didn't hear this guy no more.
There's no tears in my heart. My heart bleeds for all those brothers, man, you know. I've seen it, man. I've been through the fire. I've seen it.
Our objective was to reach them as rapidly as possible and protect them.
Well, was there anything in your plan that would have protected the hostages in the circle in the yard, which is where they were on Sunday, if the inmates there were determined to cut their throats?
In the event that we didn't reach them in time?
Well, you couldn't have reached them in 5 or 10 seconds that it would take to slit a throat.
No, that's what I'm getting at. In other words, I just want to clarify your question.
Sure.
Are you asking, were there any plans to do anything about the hostages if we were not able to effect our mission and surround them?
No, what I'm asking really is whether there was any way that your plan could have saved lives of the hostages if the inmates were determined to cut their throats.
Oh, I doubt it.
Dunbar stated that the reason that Oswald gave the order to come in and shooting, he personally saw an officer having his throat cut. He says he watched this officer have his throat cut. He says, and he was really, really terrified by this, you know. And he said he also saw in the process an officer being emasculated. This was the incentive for coming in and killing everybody.
Now, all the days before the assault and during the day of the assault, we as responsible newsmen depended on the word of the Commissioner of the State Department of Corrections. He came out here repeatedly at the height of the most dramatic moment that has ever happened in the state of New York, and repeatedly gave us what we were led to understand was factual information, information we now question, front to back. We asked him to give us the courtesy of responding to those questions, give us some answers. Short of that, he's frightened and scared.
What information did he give you that was inaccurate? He told us about flashing clothes.
And I want to especially criticize the news media, which accepted as true, without any reservation, without using the word alleged, the statements of the prison authorities and the governor that the men, the hostages, had had their throat cuts, that one had been emasculated, and that two had been killed long before the onslaught by the state troopers. You did everyone a disservice in accepting that fact. You did everyone a disservice and might have caused additional tragedy in reporting as fact what now has proved to be lies. And I think in the future, you should judge your own consciences in how you report statements of public officials without any opportunity of the outside world to verify them.
The press was eager to get out a story. More eager to get out a story than to investigate the story they were getting out. They wanted to say, well, we'll get the scoop here. We'll get it to the readers quick. But they wasn't concerned with the authenticity of it.
What hostage was killed by his throat being cut? Name one. None. All of them was killed by bullets, gun wounds, shotguns, M16s and whatnot. So now after they recognized that they bullets had killed the people, now what they're going to do? They're going to dupe the people and tell the people that their throat was cut. That's the reason they told the lies. They had to justify their wrongdoing.
But,
7. You said 7 out of 9. That's what you said.
I disagree.
The impression,
sorry.
The impression.
I'm not going to argue about it. I think if you go back over your tape, you'll find out I said several. I understand.
The point is there were none.
The forensic pathologist who did the examination reported that the cause of death in each instance was gunshot wounds.
And even after they found it was wrong, they didn't put in their papers that, okay, we found we were wrong. They didn't do that. They just didn't speak about it at all. Like, okay, so we made it. But however, if it was proven, and it has been proven, if they were wrong, they should have reprinted an apology. You know, to their readers. They told them a lie, you know. Not only that, I would go one step further. They should put an apology to us. Okay, how can you apologize to a dead man?
And we commit his body to the ground, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust.
If Rockefeller had taken your father's advice, what do you think would be the situation today?
Well, I think that most likely my father would be alive right now, and that was more or less the big wheel's fault for giving the state troopers the order to attack them.
Did you have any communication with the governor prior to September 13?
Prior to?
Yes.
No, sir.
And when you asked prior to, did you have a communication afterward?
Yes, sir.
What was that communication?
Telephone.
And what was the nature of the conversation?
He spoke to me.
And when he spoke to you and thanked you?
Yes, sir.
I imagine that they would have come in, you know, with the nightsticks and so forth. They would have taken over the prison and retaken the prison, but I never expected them to start shooting like that.
And then they had a PA system saying, place your hands on your head and surrender to the nearest officer and you won't be harmed. And they kept shooting people when they said that. They said they shot people, right?
It was a slaughter line, man. It was, people were defenseless. All right, they had sticks and homemade weapons to defend themselves, but this doesn't compare, man, with magnums and carbines. Well, this is ridiculous.
They call it indiscriminate firing.
I call it plain, outright, premeditated murder.
We're on the roof of C block, looking at a detail of 270 marksmen with instructions to clear the catwalk upon command.
So you can load 6.
6.
And the bullet will be thrown forward, which would be arming the weapon, so to speak. One round in the chamber. The fire of the weapon will be brought up, sighted through, squeeze off the round.
And would that be approximately the speed at which a qualified 270 man can fire, Mr. Little? Were you qualified as a 270 man?
Yes, I was. Yes, I was. And depending on what you'd be shooting at, a stationary or a moving target, and whether you were resting or whether you were firing offhand. But that's the speed that I would probably fire the weapon if I were hunting.
And what was the position in which people were firing this? Are they kneeling?
Yes, they were kneeling over a parapet in this fashion, looking down into the yard.
I was laying perfectly still, more or less like playing possum, and these bullet slugs kept exploding right near my head, but I didn't dare move. And I noticed every time one would hit the ground in front of me with mushrooms, so I knew they were shooting these hollow nose bullets. And I didn't know at the time what caliber or anything, but I know it was what people what's popularly known as dum-dums.
Well, I was hitting my left side with what they call dum-dums, you know. Till I passed out in the cell, you know, from loss of blood, internal bleeding. And they took all kind of x-rays and said they couldn't remove the bullet, you know. It was too close to vital spots and, you know, due to the type of bullet, I guess, you know. You know, I'm constantly in pain. I guess I have to live in the rest of my life, you know, that's what they're telling me, you know.
As you can see, the projectile, as it leaves the weapon upon impact, begins to, and it is designed to expand inside the body of the game animal, the target animal. Pursuant to the Geneva Conferences and respective of the sentiments expressed therein, to prevent, insofar as is possible in war, unnecessary human suffering, the United States military personnel are prohibited from use of this kind of ammunition in combat.
And after we were taking the A block there, we were there for our guys, we were required to run the gauntlet, you know. They got officers on both sides, you know. And we were required to run that where they had the belts and the buckles and everything out there was like whamming them, you know. A lot of guys got broken limbs on account of that.
I saw lines of uniformed correction officers on either side of the corridor, swinging their clubs and striking the males who were running through there.
So I was in charge of the litter team. So I just picked the first door as we got into the reception center. And as I walked in, I got the door a quarter of a way or halfway open, and I saw correction officers bending over, beating on somebody that was on the floor. And they told me to shut the door, that I wasn't allowed into that room.
Did you receive any reports that day of any acts of mistreatment of inmates?
No, sir, I did not. But basically, they were in the position of having surrendered, hands on head, were coming down and were very forcefully being forced down the steps, were forced to lie down and low crawl across there. Apparently, the method employed to get them to lie down was to hit them with a club across the knees, or in several instances, not too disguised attempts to hit them in the genitalia was made. Injury was done to prisoners at that point by the violence with which they were forced to lie on the ground and crawl across.
The most frightening part about the whole thing was when they'd moved everybody into A block yard, and had us on our faces laying down, and like I was trying to look up and look around at what they were doing, and a policeman came over and he put the shotgun barrel right against my head and told me to bury my nose in the mud. And he kept the gun barrel against my head for about a good 5 minutes, just stood right there with the gun barrel pressed into my skull, you know. I was crying then because I was really afraid that they were going to pull, the dude was going to pull the trigger because I'd seen him shoot a couple other people.
There had accumulated a group of persons just at the door leading from D to A. These were people who had not been there previously. They were ones who had bullet wounds or, in one instance, a fractured leg. This man I saw get his fractured leg. He was coming down the steps and was hit across his tibial area, which is the forefront of his leg.
Who, when you say you saw him hit by what kind of personnel?
They were primarily the prison guards themselves.
Were they calling them names? Or
yes,
what were they saying?
I hesitate to use such language.
Well, I think we've had this language here, if you can.
Company, there were racial epithets. The classic Anglo-Saxonism of F-U-C-K was used in multiple times. The basic tenor of the thing was, you sons of bitches had your week last week, this week is going to be our week.
I would comment on it as a professional. Under a situation like that, it was most appropriate to have them on the ground and crawling along. It is true that it had rained that night or the day before, and the ground in spots were muddy. That's the situation at the time. To strip them, to assure that there was no weapons on their persons is appropriate, or in their clothing, or that they had no injuries on their body is appropriate too. And I would say a routine and standard practice in terms of situation like this.
They stripped us of everything we wore. They took our watches and they ground them into the ground. The same thing with the eyeglasses and the false teeth and everything. They took it away from us and they ground them into the ground.
And they smashed all my glasses, my wristwatch. They just smashed them, you know, with stormtroopers, state troopers, boots. They smashed everything.
I was taken out of the yard, and I was put on a table, nude, laying on the table with my head looking up at the catwalk, being spit on, hot shells thrown on my body, cigarettes thrown on my testicles. They had a football under my throat. I am looking up at a shotgun, and if it fall from under my chin, I would be killed. My body, at present, have cigar burns, cigarette burns all over it. My testicles at times bother me now from cigarette butts, sticks, rifles.
Did you see any inmates lying in that yard with shotgun shells on them?
Yes, sir, I did.
Now, did you ask anybody for an explanation of why they were being held like that?
Yes, sir. I was informed that they were some of the identified ringleaders and what I would describe as the unusualness of the situation with the shotgun shell on his breast or on as his knees were up like this, lying on his back, so that he didn't move.
Did you consider that to be an appropriate way of restraining a person?
The alternative, I suppose, would have been to handcuff them. I don't know that they had them there. It's an unusual way.
I believe a lot of inmates were killed after the takeover proper. There was a lot of sporadic shooting late into the night afterwards. And a lot of inmates will pull out of their cells at night, late at night. And, well, draw your own conclusions.
They come around later looking for the guys, you know. He said, "Oh, you Frank Locke, come on out," you know. He said, "We got our orders to remove you." I said, "Remove me where, man?" You know, he said, "No, man, come on." So he's with other two state troopers, walking with the gun like that. So then they took me to the D block over there where the ditches had been dug by some of the inmates. They took me over by the ditches, and they asked me, was I going to beg for my life, you understand? So I refused to say something, say anything, because I resigned and they was going to shoot me. Here's a guy here with a gun like this, a .38 stub nose like this, and another guy with a rifle and all this shit. And I thought they was going to, you know, like kill me, you know. So I didn't say anything. So just a few seconds or so, a guy hauled out through the break-in window, correction officer. I'll never forget his face as long as I live. He told him to bring him back. You know, he's not the one to bring him. So they brought me back, you understand?
cold-blooded, premeditated murder. This is not a farce. I am telling you what I seen with my own eyes. I speak of my dead brother, L.D. Barkley. I know for a fact that he was premeditatedly murdered. I know this.
I saw 4 men on the ground, fully clothed, with their heads to the ground. And I told Bobby Garcia, there's L.D. Barkley, the young man from Rochester. And I asked whether or not they were dead, and he said no, they were alive. And I, to the best of my ability, and I've stated this in federal court, recognized one of them as being L.D. Barkley.
Brother L.D., I know they murdered him because I seen him when they had us in the A-block area searching us, you know. I seen him and I testified to that effect too. And the thing about it, after I had testified, I came down to see my attorney right after that on the other side down the hall a bit. The officer wanted me to write Judge Curtin and told him that I made a mistake in my testimony in regard to seeing this brother L.D. that they killed. And I immediately told him what to kiss, you know, and things like that.
And I did say in my notes, and I want to repeat it here, sir, because it is my firm belief, from my knowledge of the plan and what I could observe of it, there was excellent self-discipline, excellent self-control, excellent response to commands, to my knowledge, and while we were all concerned about the number of casualties that would occur, and while there were some, if you look at it as I do and try to report it to you, that only, and I believe 24 initially died, I'm going by memory now, and
39.
Initially, sir, there were some that wounded that died later is the point I'm trying to make, but that's maybe beside the point.
I don't know whether you draw a distinction between whether the wound is so mortal that you die that moment, or whether you die within 24 hours or 48 hours.
But in view of the situation, I'm only trying to say the number of casualties reflect to me quite honestly that there was this excellent self-discipline and self-control and good plan.
But I would regard your position as the state official as being one to uphold the law. These men were entitled, whatever they did, to due process. And I would think that it is to me inappropriate for you to come before us and seek to justify that in the way you have.
Mr. Carter, I certainly respect your right to an opinion and the like. I can only respond by asking you to examine the record of a young man that grew up in a cosmopolitan neighborhood, that was student body president, that played football with every ethnic group, that I have been without prejudice, that I was commended in California for developing a comprehensive program for the recruitment and development of minority groups in correctional work, and I've always struggled for fairness and democracy and equal opportunity. And I stand on that record, sir.
Well, I stand on what I've said.
Thank you.
The only way that they think it's possible to satisfy the people is come with a mass of indictments. That way, they think that the people's just gonna get their mind off of what is really going on.
The state has poured in hundreds of thousands of dollars. In fact, Governor Rockefeller decided to divert all of the resources of the newly created Organized Crime Task Force. This was a special section of the Attorney General's office that had been just set up in 1971, supposedly to finally in a comprehensive way attack organized crime in New York State. Instead, because of Governor Rockefeller's need to vindicate what he did at Attica, he diverted that entire task force under Mr. Fisher to investigate the Attica situation.
There are no blacks on the grand jury. There are no young people on the grand jury, really. You know, young people can vote now, like 18. I don't think there's anyone on the grand jury 21 years old. And the income is very high. It's like from $10,000 on up. Some people own whole business, you know, like a bus service, and that's, you know, pretty big money. So we don't have any fears there, really.
All inmates thus far that has been indicted. And it was them that murdered 40, people in that yard, even their own employees.
They came in and they showed who the criminals was. We got brothers going in the courtroom with legs on, with arms on, and got bullets all in them. What did we do? We only stood up and asked to be treated as a man.
They had to bring indictment. They murdered us there. And they had to have some reason to tell the world why they murdered us. Now, the conditions that were in Attica, they created. We didn't create the conditions, you see. We came there and we were caught up in them. And we spoke against them. And so because of that, they indicted us against us.
On the correctional facility, facilities, this is I was just handed up by one of our counsel, a report that we received there that indicates that 89% had adult criminal records, which indicates that the system did nothing for them. That whatever happened during the process of their incarceration, they came out into the street and went right back in.
The penitentiary, it affects everybody, because if the penitentiary is used to reform, right? A person goes to jail. If he's not reformed, he's going to rip you off, man. Assuming that, I am an animal, right, when I go in. If I'm not dealt with, when I come out, I'm going to rip you off, man. So you're going to pay twice. You're going to pay through your taxes, then you're going to pay again if I stick you up.
Now, you've been in the correction institution system since 1937, have you not, Mr.
Yes, sir, I
McCusey?
have.
Would you say that recidivism was on the rise during the period of time that you've been familiar with our correction institutions in the state of New York?
I've seen statistics to that effect. May I submit to you, Mr. Brasco, that this problem of corrections is a very complex problem.
Oh, I understand that. But I think that I can safely say that 89% at Attica having prior criminal records is a clear indictment of our system's failure to rehabilitate.
It's a multi-million-dollar enterprise or industry, and it's the only industry that, functions off of failures.
The most standard, the most basic wage in the metal shop in Attica is like 25 cents a day. Now, for what is produced and manufactured in that metal shop, you'd be surprised at the money that be made in Attica behind the sweat, behind the slave labor of the men that's working in 105, 110 degree in that metal shop.
They need the manpower to run this industry. They need the personnel to run these industries. And what is rehabilitation? I don't think such a thing exists.
The town of Attica thrives off of, the people inside the penitentiary. You see, if it wasn't for, the institution, the people wouldn't have no jobs. You have the mayor of the town works inside the joint, right? You have, it's like what you call nepotism, I think, was when you have, your brother, your cousin, your uncle. Everyone works inside the joint.
On the day of the riot, there were 398 correctional personnel assigned to Attica. In talking to them, we found that their major motivation in taking a job at the Department of Corrections was not to do correctional work, but because it was a good job. It's a secure job. It has good pay for a rural area. It has retirement benefits. And at least in the past, up until about the middle 50s, it paid a good deal more than civilian employment in the area, than farming, or than other state civil service or law enforcement jobs.
Here I am dedicating myself to these people.
But you spend your life working with them.
Yes,
Don't
sir.
You think
I'm proud of the work I do.
Let me tell them this. This is what got us upset. This Department of Correction seems to be going downhill. It's everything to make it easier for these inmates, and the easier you treat these people, the harder it is for us.
But yet you say you're trying to rehabilitate them.
That's right. You know what their mentality is? Very low.
Like you have a few people, a few guards that they try to relate. But there's, like I said, there's this little inner circle where if you have a young guard who might come in and he might try to relate to, me or someone else, he is, more or less castrated, or he's really harassed by his own fellow guards because they don't want him to treat me as a human being or a man, because this would be acknowledging that I'm a human being, and so they don't want any of the guards to do this. And if they continue to do it, they'll put them on the wall. By the wall, I mean that they'll put them on the tower, or they'll put them on the night shift when there's no one that he can relate to around. And this is what happens to the guards. And most of the guards are like from a rural background, white, and like they really can't relate. I mean, there's no communication.
Due to the fact that approximately 75% of the institutions in this New York State are black, they don't have the proper facilities to deal with them. They need more black teachers, black instructors, black correction officers, black ministers, black priests, and they need black councilmen. I'm talking about guidance people, somebody to understand the problem.
Then it is the Civil Services Commission's fault that you only have one black guard at Attica? Or not even one black guard, one black employee?
I wouldn't ascribe fault.
Well, is it the
I would say that
services?
this is a fact.
For the past 50, 60 years, they just assume that they know the problems of a black person from the ghetto, and they don't know it.
Come from New York.
They're just plain people to us.
But they come from
Color
New York.
means nothing.
But they come from New York City, from a different kind of world.
They come from all over New York State.
Right, but most of them come from a lot from New York City. And many guards come from upstate farmland, and they're just from two different worlds. Is that a problem?
No, it isn't. Because we seem to mingle and get along pretty good.
What did you say again?
Well, what they do is they go into your cell. They will destroy your literature. You might write some, essays. They'll go in there, take your bed, turn it upside down, and just, more or less make your little living conditions which you have just as horrible as they can.
I understand the reasons that it takes, so many people to control that many people. But by time morning comes and you open that cell, there's no other way a man can feel but bitter and full of hate, and he has to be a superb intellect beyond all intellect, Buddha, to remember that the people who are keeping him here are human beings. Because it is that bad.
Now, what is your professional feeling about prisoners being allowed to send out uncensored mail?
If censorship is taken away, I feel that the prisoner will be the loser.
Every time you get a letter, it's open, it's censored. If they think you aren't supposed to get it, they'll cut it, like quite a few of my letters I get. They'll be all cut up. If they don't cut the stuff out the letter, they'll erase it.
Through censorship, many things which accrue to the prisoner's value are found out.
So they censor it so often that each officer knows your personal business. Officer, you're going to be in the yard tomorrow, you might have words with him. All right, so you don't get no mail for 3 or 4 days because he's angry. How can he get back at you? Easily, hold your mail back.
I don't think that anyone who has never been near a jail, the average person, will believe what a jail is. There is no way on earth you can really convince the average, especially middle-class person, as to what a jail is like. It's a lot worse than anybody thinks it is.
You see, when a man serves you your food, he takes your food and gives it to you like he's serving an animal
How do you feel? How would you feel?
There's no way in the world that I could possibly describe to you exactly what his food is like. No more than tell you it's not even fit for a dog to eat. The main diet is starch, potatoes and bread.
The soup is basically hot water. If they say chicken soup, you won't find a piece of chicken in there. Well, one thing you find in the soup, if they say bean soup, you'll definitely find some beans. Otherwise, you don't find anything. The soup is just hot water.
What was the per capita cost?
62 cents a day at that time.
I'm told that that was a figure that produced a diet below the level of the welfare department. Did you consider it to be adequate?
I can only say that in a department that Attica for years had the reputation of being one of the best feeding institutions.
But that's speaking comparatively. What about looking at it more objectively? Did you consider feeding people on 62 cents a day to be adequate?
It could have been much more adequate with more, I will say that.
Some people have ulcers or, any ailment, a heart condition, asthma, and it's a hassle to get some treatment. And this is one of the easiest ways to destroy people. And this is a part of Attica, 2 doctors, among the other things.
I have a terminal disease known as polycystic kidneys. Dr. Williams, the doctor over here, and Dr. Sternberg, they both refused to treat me. I was urinating blood for 36 days straight, and he refused to do anything for me. So I finally got the lawyers to get me out to the hospital. The hospital has asked the institution to commit me to the hospital where they can do more testing because my right kidney has stopped operating. I'm working only on 7% of my left kidney. And they want to take the right kidney out, and they refuse to let me go.
It's very obvious when you go up there and see the conditions and talk to these people that it was the conditions that caused it. And, it was a situation where the people up there, the men up there, had no real choice because they were dying. And, because these demands that they presented, it wasn't the past 2 weeks that they presented it. They presented these demands back in April and then presented them again in July.
There was some, reform submitted to Oswald about July, about asking just for menial things like, more showers, better food, lessening of, restrictions on reading material, things of this nature.
I consider it a request.
But whatever it was something that I take it you had studied the manifesto and you had looked into the conditions. And is it fair to say that you felt that many of the grievances expressed there were reasonable?
Yes, I did.
And in fact, many of them appeared on the so-called 28 demands which you agreed to. Am I correct?
That's
and you
right.
considered them reasonable, at least when you agreed to them then?
Right.
There were demands submitted to Rockefeller and Oswald, and they just don't pay it any mind. I guess they throw it in a wastebasket.
Was there any attempt made to deal with the basic grievances that they expressed in this manifesto, many of which appeared in the 28 demands and which were at that time over the bodies of hostages acknowledged by the commissioner?
Well, they were checked out, and anything that could be done at the institutional level to many of those were on the commissioner's level or had to do with parole, over which they had no.
Well, they had
problem.
to do with parole and matters which were either for the legislature or for the correction department, but they also had to do with things such as matters we've discussed, the showers, the soap, as well as diet. Were there any things here that in this manifesto that caused any change or response on the institutional level?
Yes, there was, pork was not used to the extent that it was before, and the diet is one of the things.
One of the things that brought blacks and whites together in Attica was the memorial for George Jackson, which happened a couple weeks before the rebellion.
There was, as we've heard this morning, an institution-wide demonstration in August. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that was the commemoration of the death of George Jackson at San Quentin. What was the reaction among inmates you talked to the shooting of George Jackson?
Well, inmates had always generally been aware that in the past, institution members could get away with killing inmates, as evidenced by the bodies found down in one of the southern institutions. But nobody ever really expected it to happen, or at least they didn't stop to think about it as being a real possibility until it happened to Jackson. The fact that there was no official investigation into it, that there was a story given out, and that it seemed that the outside world believed it, this made it appear to the inmate at Attica that if they can get away with it there, they can get away with it anywhere.
You have people that feel that they're a little better than other people. And that was, no less a factor in Attica. You had guys that worked for the warden that thought they were better than guys that worked in, in the laundry. And guys that worked in the laundry thought they were better than guys that worked in the mess hall. Guys that worked in the mess hall thought they were better than guys that cleaned, mopped and swept the hallways. So it was a thing, it was a class thing. But on this particular day, the George Jackson thing, everybody said, everybody was together. The warden's running was sitting with the guy that mopped the hallway.
That morning everybody went to mess hall. Nobody had touched anything. Nobody had talked. As soon as they left the gallery, nobody had talked on their way to the mess hall, And the officers who was on duty was frightening, because even you would feel frightened because it was like a church, it was something like you never experienced before. It was silence, And it was something you could hear the timepiece on your hand ticking,
Did the unity which was demonstrated at Jackson Day create apprehension on your part?
Yes, it did.
What brought you to Attica in the first week of September?
I wanted to sit down and talk with some of the people there. I wanted to have an opportunity to get a feel of the institution on the spot. I wanted to talk with some of the signers of this, quote, manifesto, which I never consider such.
Commissioner Oswald then left behind the tape, and that was played for the inmates.
Many of you have voiced confidence in me and in the directions I have talked about, and I appreciate this. I'm certain you realize that change can't be accomplished overnight. But I can assure you that changes will be made, just as some changes have already taken place in the brief period of 8 months.
I was in my cell when he played his tape, We was in the cell, and they played the tape, and like you hear different comments and all this, guys are saying, he's bullshit and things like this, say, that sucker ain't gonna do nothing. This is, they've been doing this here for years, making like they're gonna do something, and actually ain't gonna do nothing, An
official could get up there and say, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that, I'm gonna do this, better food, no more brutality, better educational system, no more racism, right? No more callousness. And while he's saying this, through the corner of his mouth and the other side, he's saying, put that guy in a box, kill him, torture him, don't let him out, he's voicing his political views, feed them garbage.
I mean, it takes something like, a physical action to bring any type of attention to, the conditions that are inside the institution.
The next time that Commissioner Oswald spoke to the inmates of Attica, he was in D Yard on September 9th.
So what's more important? The lives of these people or the retaking of this institution? This institution is not important. It's lives that we're interested in here. What's more important?
But if we cannot live as people
then we will at least try to die like men.
The guard was sent into state.
You will not be harmed.
I think what happened is definitely the authorities' fault. I really do. I feel that they know their prisons and they know very well not one of them could survive in them.
Even after dealing with the problem and knowing what the problem is, it has been exposed, 43 people. There have still been no consideration. All rhetoric. Everybody's talking about, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. When are you going to do this? The problem is now.
See, ain't nothing changed. Everything is still the same. We still ain't got nothing. People have been telling them for years. They know what's got to be done. They just don't want to do it. They refuse to do anything. And they're going to keep on refusing. And they're going to keep right on having more atticas and more atticas until they finally realize they got to do something. But they're slow learners or something.
Could you tell us whether you adopted any new programs as a result of this, or intensified any old programs designed to reduce the possibility of recurrence?
We have instituted 2 gun posts.
All they speak about is security, 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 security. They wouldn't need no security if they would give us some help, some concrete help. But the people in the street don't think about this. They paying it. When they cast those votes, that's what they got to think about. Where that money is going, what is it for? What is it doing for the man behind the wall? We are lost. They're hiding us.
Actually, conditions are worse because there are officers, you know, like the pigs, right, walk around with M16s and, you know, various weapons, and nothing's going on now. See what I'm saying? There's heavy supervision. There's more security for the administration. So conditions have gotten worse in essence.
And they set up all types of gun posts in the yard, you know, where the inmates go at, you know, the population yard. You know, it used to be, gun posts used to be on the wall, but now it's in the yard where small yards where the inmates be at, you know. So any type of gathering, all the rifles are pointing on you, you know. And they just dying, you know, to shoot somebody. Somebody's gonna, you know, trigger off a shot and everybody else gonna follow.
It could happen all over again, easily. It has happened right after Attica, Yardville, Rawway. And it's still happening. Certainly, I see more Atticas. Just before I came out, something broke out in, come on, Pete, Baltimore, I believe. It was a small thing. Some people had escaped from prison, women and men, right? Certainly, I see more Atticas.
The white racist, he showed me something with that bloodbath that we had on the 13th in Attica. That woke me up. And that made me look deeper at me. So I took a look at myself. But then I took my head off and put it on the bed and researched it. And got myself together. And started dealing with my problems. Which me, of the people.
I don't know. My brother, he is strong. You understand? He's not no pushover. He's not gonna let nobody push over him.
And knowing that my family and my friends and my loved ones, and my brothers and sisters, you know, is so concerned, that make my part of the struggle much, much broader. You know, because I know that if I ever stop, you know, then I'm not going to be contented with myself. Because I'll be letting them down.
And I came back home and I was so happy, you know, I told everybody, my friends, I said, if you were to go up there and see my brother, you wouldn't believe that he was in prison. Because he is so strong. So I asked him, you know, what was he doing up there? He said, right now he was reading. He said if you was to go in his room, he got so many books in there, he said you wouldn't even be able to get in. So you had to back up to get in his room. He said if you wanted to know anything, he said ask him, he would tell you. Anything you want to know. He's very strong. And I believe one day, when he do be free, he gonna really make this world become something.
My life is for the people, for the rest of my life, for the oppressive people.
People got to wake up. See, this is the whole situation. People have been asleep too long. So it could be because they're politically unaware of what's going on, or they just never paid any attention to it because they have their own problems. But they got to wake up because this is really affecting them too, and they don't realize it yet. The only time they realize is when there's an explosion, when something happens. Look what occurred. Look at Dunbar, the assistant commissioner. Real fraud. Biggest fraud there is. You can see right through him. If anybody can't see through him, then they need eyeglasses. And Rockefeller sanctioned all this. He actually sanctioned all this. And Nixon sanctioned Rockefeller. Look who we got as a president. And if people can't wake up behind all these things.
Before, I had been pretty much of a pacifist and just like getting high all the time, things like that, you know. I found out that if you don't become involved, you're really giving your sanction to whatever order is existing. You know, and if you don't voice some kind of political or social opinion about the way things are, to at least, try to change them, then you're as bad as the people that are upholding all the establishments.
The 13th woke me up when I saw those, when I almost got shot twice. And it was a black man that saved my life. And he ended up getting shot. And that woke me up.
I didn't think that I would survive. Like I said, I was shot 7 times, and I really thought that it was all over. But somehow I did survive. So for this, I'm grateful, But a lot of brothers didn't make it. And I think about this. And I think about that those brothers, that didn't make it. They cannot be forgotten. They cannot have died in vain. Their deaths must mean something. It must be made known to the people what their deaths meant. You see, what the whole struggle was about. People used to forget. Because we're living in a world that's fast moving, Things are happening every day. Things that happened yesterday, today become passé, forgotten about. So I cannot let this die. And I will not let it die in the minds, the hearts, the people. Because it is a part of me. And it is this that I am dedicated to keeping alive, you see, in the minds and the hearts of the people. So that they can always realize that these things can happen to them.
What I see is this for the people in the street. I see, wake up. Stop hiding. Stop talking about it don't exist. Stop talking about you don't understand it. Stop talking about that cold water flat you live in is good enough for you. Stop talking about where you in jail and you getting 3 meals a day. Other than that, wake up. Because the same thing is happening to me is happening to you. And deal. Petition. Rallies. Let the people, let the governor, let the president and people that in a position to do something about this know how you feel about your sons and your daughters that's incarcerated. Other than that, wake up. Because nothing comes to a sleeper but a dream.
This presentation is produced by the Committee to End the Marion Lockdown. It tells a story about Marion Federal Penitentiary, control units, and the role of prisons in this country that is kept hidden. And yet it is all true, and of fundamental importance to anyone concerned with building a more just and human society.
Marion Federal Penitentiary is located in Marion, Illinois, in the southern part of the state, right next to Carbondale, the home of Southern Illinois University. To get to the prison, one must take 3 small country roads that wind through farms and cow pastures. The road to Marion leads up to the prison and then stops. It goes nowhere. It is the end of the line. The same is true of the prison.
Federal prisons are given security ratings. Level 1 is the least secure, and Level 6 is the most secure. Marion is the only Level 6 prison in the United States. In fact, the Level 6 rating was created just for Marion. This means that the men there are under constant and total control of the prison authorities, more so than at any other prison. The men at Marion live in their cells in strict isolation about 23 hours a day. In the rest of the federal prison system, prisoners are let out an average of 13 hours a day. Imagine being locked in a 7 by 9 foot cell in solitary confinement with no human interaction, 23 hours a day, 7 days a week. Using a commode 1 foot from where you sleep. Eating all your meals in this very same space. The last time an American prison was run with most inmates in their cells was in the 1800s. The practice was abandoned because it drove prisoners insane. Studies have indicated that prolonged sensory deprivation and isolation result in resentment, rage, and mental destruction.
At Marion, there is no pretense of rehabilitation. There are virtually no education or work opportunities. Visitation rights and correspondence are severely restricted, and no contact visits are ever allowed. This means that the men can never touch their children, wives, or other loved ones who come to visit. Conversations are recorded and watched. Very few people venture this far to endure such frustrating and humiliating conditions. Many prisoners ask loved ones not to visit while they are at Marion. Beds are now concrete slabs with pads on top of them. On each of the 4 sides is a metal ring. According to a reporter from National Public Radio who has been inside Marion,
guards have the power to chain a man, spread-eagled and naked, to this concrete bunk. Guards, 3 to an inmate, brandish steel-tipped riot batons whenever they move a single prisoner through the prison. The prisoner wears leg irons and is cuffed behind his back. The security force and intimidation are a demonstration of raw power, and it is power which is used to control the population at Marion. Indeed, when a prisoner steps out of line, he expects to be beaten. Guards call it counseling.
whenever the men leave the control unit, even when they go to court or the hospital, even though they are always guarded and shackled, they receive finger probes of the rectum. The prison maintains it is looking for contraband. The prisoners maintain that the purpose of these finger probes is to humiliate and degrade them, and consider the probes to be rape.
This video is about control units. To understand these units, one must first understand their history and the context in which they have been built and continue to exist. This is the purpose of the next section.
In 1934, the U.S. turned an old fort on Alcatraz Island in San Francisco Bay into a federal prison. This would serve as the end of the line for men, the prison that would incarcerate all those who were hated by the system. Some of the prisoners held at Alcatraz included well-known gangsters like Al Capone and Robert Stroud, the famous Birdman, but also people like Rafael Cancel Miranda, the Puerto Rican national hero, and Morton Sobel, co-defendant with Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. Alcatraz proved to be too expensive and its brutal conditions too controversial. In 1963, Alcatraz was shut down and Marion Prison was opened. The same brutality would prevail, except that it would come dressed up in experts and the new technology.
The 10 or so years following the opening of Marion were the most revolutionary in the history of the United States prison system. Virtually every state system sustained major rebellions, and names like Attica, San Quentin, Soledad, Auburn, Atmore-Holman, and dozens more became essential components in the struggle against racism.
In addition, many revolutionaries during that time were imprisoned, including people like George Jackson, Fred Hampton, Angela Davis, the Puerto Rican nationalists, Imari Obadeli, Huey Newton, and literally hundreds more.
The prison situation was out of control, and the U.S. had to do something about it. The government sponsored research on and began practicing brainwashing and behavior modification techniques like psychosurgery, chemical alteration of behavior, sensory deprivation, and solitary confinement.
Marion was where it all settled in, as the prison became the trendsetter for the entire system. The control unit concept was officially started there in July of 1972 in response to a peaceful prisoner protest against the guard beating of a Mexican prisoner. But resistance did not stop, as protests and work stoppages continued throughout the decade. In September of 1980, there were 3 work stoppages to protest the brutality of the prison.
Much has been written about the horrors of Marion. As predicted since its inception, the control unit produces in prisoners feelings of intense rage and hopelessness that eventually manifest themselves as violence against one another or against guards. According to a congressional report, from February 1980 to June 1983, along with 14 attempted escapes and 10 group disturbances, there were 54 serious inmate-on-inmate assaults. 8 inmates were killed by other prisoners, and there were 28 serious assaults on staff.
In October of 1983, 2 guards were killed in the control unit in isolated incidents by 2 prisoners. Although there was no rebellion, prison authorities seized the opportunity to violently repress the entire prison and turn it into one huge control unit, locking down every prisoner in his cell for 23 hours a day. Groups of guards were brought in from other prisons to reestablish official control. After removing their name tags to prevent identification, these guards rampaged through Marion, beating many of the prisoners and destroying their personal property. According to David Hale, a former prison guard,
after the lockdown, we went cell to cell, and they beat inmates who were ideal inmates, had never caused the staff any trouble. It was just retaliation got out of hand.
David Hale was fired. And to this date, the prison remains on what authorities claim will be permanent lockdown. In other words, the whole of Marion Federal Penitentiary is now basically one big control unit. Such circumstances exist nowhere else in the United States. Gail Franzen, past director of Illinois Corrections and a self-described hardliner, says,
At Marion, they're treating a problem with what appears to be the creation of a larger problem, which is much more frustration, much more tension, much more want to do violence just to kind of get even by people who wouldn't necessarily participate in violent acts. And that's what's frightening about Marion.
Warden Hinman himself has said,
What is unique to Marion is that a usually temporary status, lockdown, has become a permanent control operation.
John Campbell, a prisoner at Marion, says,
I understand that I am a convicted bank robber and belong in prison for what I did, but I have never done what is being done here at Marion to me and my friends. No one belongs in an environment where he's buried alive, where he's in a tomb for the dead, and the police have total control over you, and they abuse that control frequently, either on a psychological level or a physical level.
Another prisoner at Marion, Steve Layton, says,
They try to drag up the monster in you. It eats on a person's mind.
Marion is now the showcase of the federal prison system, its experimental laboratory. It is quiet, orderly, machine-like. It is considered a plum assignment by wardens and guards, and prison officials from around the country are marched through the prison to show them this ultimate model of high-tech repression. 20 states have taken a look at it. In the summer of '88, Michigan followed suit and opened a control unit named Supermax in Ionia, Michigan. The Lexington Control Unit for women political prisoners was modeled after Marion. Considerable protest and a successful lawsuit has forced the Bureau of Prisons to announce they will shut down Lexington.
Although Marion is alleged to hold the most violent prisoners, a congressional report revealed that 80% of those held at Marion were eligible for other prisons. Other studies have shown that many men were at Marion because they wrote too many lawsuits or angered prison officials in some other way. There are no rules that state why people get sent to Marion or how and why they get to leave. There are only the vaguest and most arbitrary guidelines that all revolve around pleasing guards and wardens, guidelines that allow disciplinary actions at Marion for failing to replace paper, salt, and pepper packets on a food tray, or for hanging wet clothes to dry on the bars of a cell. The Constitution does not seem to apply to people at Marion.
Amnesty International, the Nobel Prize-winning organization that monitors human rights abuses around the world, issued a report in June 1987 condemning Marion, the first time the organization has ever condemned a U.S. prison. All of the facts we have cited above and more are documented in the report. Amnesty concluded that Marion's policies appear to violate the United Nations standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners. In fact, Amnesty went so far as to send to the director of the Bureau of Prisons a copy of another of its reports entitled Safeguards Against Torture. It added that conditions at Marion, in their totality, amount to cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment.
Marion is indeed for control, but not for control of violent prisoners. It is an extreme but integral part of the U.S. prison system. In this next section, we discuss who is in prison and try to delineate the true purpose of prisons. It is only in this context that we can begin to understand the true purpose of Marion.
In 1987, there were well over 500,000 people in prisons in the United States and 250,000 people in jails. When we talk about imprisonment for the rest of this presentation, we speak only about those people in prison, not those in jail, nor those on probation, parole, or any of those other criminal justice categories. The U.S. is adding about 1,000 prisoners per week, or about 52,000 per year, to its system. To put this number in perspective, we can note that Illinois has fewer than 25,000 prisoners.
This shows U.S. imprisonment rates per 100,000 people, starting in 1930 and extending until 1986. These rates are given per 100,000 population. Thus, the rate for 1930 tells us that for every 100,000 people living in the U.S. that year, 104 of them were in prison. As you can see, the rates were similar for about 40 years and then really started zooming up after 1970. Now they are almost double any rate that occurred before 1970. The proportion of prisoners that are black has also doubled, from 23% in 1930 to 46% in 1980. And the proportion that is Spanish-speaking was 8% in 1980 and is increasing rapidly.
This chart shows U.S. imprisonment rates by race. As you can see, in 1983, the rate for black people was 713 per 100,000 population. The rate for Hispanic people was 232, and the rate for white people was 114, more than 6 times less than the rate for black people. Here we see the imprisonment proportions by race for Illinois. Black people constitute 60% and Hispanic people 7% of the prison population, although black and Hispanic people constitute only about 15% of the Illinois population. Data not shown here indicate that a black person in Illinois is 10 times more likely to go to prison than a white person.
Here are the imprisonment rates for Western Europe, the U.S., and South Africa. As you can see, the European rates group around 50, with a low of 17 in the Netherlands and a high of 94 in Finland. Now, look at the U.S. The rate for white people is like those of other Europeans, while the rate for black people is much higher, almost 25 times higher than those for Italy and the Netherlands. Perhaps most staggering, the rate for black people in the U.S. in 1980 was almost twice as high as the rate for black people in South Africa that year.
What does all of this data mean for the lives of black people? This shows that the probability that a black man will go to prison in his lifetime was 18.7% in 1979. That's almost 20%, or 1 out of 5. But this is before the rates rose so much higher. By now it must be 1 out of every 4 black men. Think about this staggering observation. 1 out of every 4 black men will go to prison in his lifetime. And remember, this does not include jail, probation, parole, etc. It's not only that these men are gone, but that their families and friends must fill the gaps they leave in the community, and that they must be supported while they are in prison with toothpaste, soap, some clothing, books, etc. In addition, when they are visited, the costs will be huge since most of the prisons in this country are far away from most urban areas. Also, whatever employment possibilities might have existed will disappear. In short, it means that an entire community is being devastated.
As we all know, crime is a very serious problem in our society. It is especially devastating in third world communities. In fact, murder is now the leading cause of death for black males between the ages of 15 and 34. But the relationship between crime and imprisonment is not as simple as what we see on TV or read about in the newspapers or find in most criminology textbooks. William Nagel, a well-known criminologist, examined many factors to determine which were correlated with high imprisonment rates. Nagel found that there was a strong correlation between the proportion of a state's population that was black and the imprisonment rate, a strong correlation between a politically conservative climate in the state and the imprisonment rate, but, very surprisingly, there was not a significant correlation between the crime rate and the imprisonment rate.
A dozen other investigations have found that imprisonment rates are strongly correlated with unemployment rates. Many other studies have found that black people are discriminated against in almost every step of the criminal justice system. They are more frequently arrested, less frequently tried by a jury of their peers, more frequently convicted, given longer sentences, and more often sentenced to death. When all of the data are put together, we see that many factors are responsible for sending people to prison, and that only one of these is the crime rate.
Some researchers like Stephen Box and Chris Hale from England do not even think that the crime rate is an important factor in determining who goes to prison. Virtually all criminologists agree that the prison system is capacity-driven. By this, they mean that no matter how many cells there are, they will always be filled, and that this will happen regardless of the crime rate. Nagel's study shows that building more prisons and putting more people into them does not solve the crime problem. He concludes,
"The causes of crime in this country are deeply rooted in its culture and in its economic and social injustices. The massive uses of incarceration has not contributed and will not contribute significantly to the abatement of crime or to the correction of flaws in the social fabric."
Saying this in another way, crime is a symptom of the true problem, which is a society based upon inequality, exploitation, and the pursuit of profit, rather than the satisfaction of human need. Imprisoning large masses of people thus cannot succeed in reducing crime. By way of conclusion of this section, we note that prisons are being filled at a rate faster than ever before in the history of the United States. This increase is associated with more and more people of color going to prison, at a rate that is the highest in the world. In fact, it is estimated that by the year 2000, U.S. prisons will contain over 1 million people, and that over half will be people of color.
Prisons don't rehabilitate and don't even pretend to rehabilitate. Furthermore, it costs over $20,000 a year to incarcerate one person, more than it would to send that person to Harvard. Finally, as Nagel and many others have pointed out, imprisonment can't stop crime and can't even be expected to. And so we ask ourselves,
what is it that prisons do? What is it that would require a system like the one we have just described? Why does this system send people of color to prison at such a staggering rate?
The only possible answer, the only answer that fits this description, is that prisons are primarily some kind of control mechanism for people of color. Some attempt to contain them both physically and politically. In addition to controlling the masses of people of color, prisons help with the attack on leaders of political movements.
Although the U.S. government claims that it has no political prisoners, Marion and Lexington prove that this is a lie. The control units are supposed to be for violent prisoners, or those who try to escape. Yet many political prisoners are sent to these units by the government right after conviction, before they have even served time in prison. According to the government's own rules, these prisoners don't belong in control units.
Nonetheless, 3 of the 5 women in the Lexington Control Unit have been political prisoners. They are Alejandrina Torres, Susan Rosenberg, and Sylvia Baraldini. In response to a 1988 lawsuit, a federal judge set an historical precedent by acknowledging that these women are political prisoners. Furthermore, he ruled that they were placed in a control unit as a result of their political beliefs, and this was a serious violation of their human rights. And men like Leonard Peltier, Rafael Cancel Miranda, Sundiata Acoli, Oscar Lopez Rivera, Kojo Bomani Sababu, Sekou Odinga, Tim Blunk, and many others like them have all done time at Marion.
But putting people in prison has not stopped the struggle for liberation, independence, and a human society. And so the state has created Marion and Lexington in an effort to intimidate those behind the walls who continue to rebel and those on the outside who might wind up in prison. Dostoevsky wrote that if you want to understand society, you should look into its prisons. If he is correct, and we of the Committee to End the Marion Lockdown think he is, the composition and nature of the prison system tell us the U.S. society is built on a foundation of white supremacy. That is, a structure that oppresses people of color and confers privilege upon white people in this country, more privilege than is held by any other people on the face of this earth. Such a structure cannot contain people of color except by force, and it is in this context that the function of prisons and control units can be best understood.
Of course, prisons are not the only place where we see these inequities, which are literally a matter of life and death. As this shows, the life expectancy for black women is about 6 years less than for white women, while the life expectancy for black men is about 7 years less than for white men. In fact, about half of all black men who work won't even live long enough to collect their Social Security.
The infant mortality rate, that is, the proportion of babies who die before they reach 1 year of age, is twice as high for blacks as it is for whites. And in many communities, the black infant mortality rate is as high as it is in parts of India, Africa, and South America. The maternal mortality rate, that is, the proportion of women who died during childbirth, is 3 times higher for black women than for white women. Professor Christine Seifert from the University of Michigan, who conducted the study reported on in this article, says,
"It is absolutely obscene that a country as rich as ours should have statistics like these."
The black unemployment rate is skyrocketing, despite the alleged recovery of the economy. Only about half the black male population has jobs, and in many communities, youth unemployment approaches 100% and shows no signs of falling. Most black youth are not working now, haven't worked in the past, and most will never have a chance to work. A government study has projected that by the year 2000, 70% of black men will be unemployed.
For those who do work, the exploitation is fierce. The median family income for black people is about half that for white people, and a recent government survey found that the median net worth of a white family is about $40,000, and of a black family is about $3,000. White families therefore own, on the average, more than 13 times as much as black families.
Schools for black people are worse than useless institutions that generate illiteracy, hopelessness, and despair. Healthcare is unavailable or inadequate, and housing is often not suitable for habitation.
Finally, there is the death penalty, used to murder black people at a rate 6 times greater than white people. According to a recent study, 7.5% of black people convicted of killing a white person in Illinois were sentenced to death, while none of the 56 white people who killed a black person received the death penalty. Although blacks and Hispanics comprise about 15% of the population of Illinois, they comprise 70% of death row.
The United Nations has defined genocide as being any or all of the following: killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, or deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. We think that it is accurate to describe what is being done to black people in this country as genocide. This is a word laden with strong meaning. We understand this and do not use it lightly. However, we believe that the facts bear us out, and that in this case we use the word accurately.
However, these conditions do not generate a situation in which black people do nothing while they wait to be oppressed. Being human means refusing to accept inhuman conditions, and black people have constantly created means to resist these conditions, to attack white supremacy, and to struggle for their liberation. Vincent Harding, in his History of Black People in the United States, entitled There is a River, has detailed the continuing thread of the fight for black liberation since the earliest days of slavery.
Sometimes the struggle is disorganized and sometimes it is not optimally directed. At other times, however, it flashes through our society like a bright light leading the way. Much of this history, however, remains buried by ignorance and racism. The slave revolts led by Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, and others, the Underground Railroad and the courage of Harriet Tubman, the anti-lynching campaigns led by Ida B. Wells, the ideas of Marcus Garvey and W.E.B. Du Bois that galvanized millions of black people in the early 1900s. The black liberation movement of the 1960s that produced such leaders as Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, the Black Panthers and George Jackson, and a new generation following in these footsteps that include Assata Shakur and Sekou Odinga. To understand this history is to understand the true potential of human beings and to understand the direction that the pursuit of a new society must take.
The control unit does not exist in isolation from this history of struggle. It is an essential component used by the government to prop up the system that affects black people from infancy through school, unemployment, degradation, and the inevitable resistance. The centrality of racism is understood well by the people who run and control this society.
It is also understood well by the very many white people who choose to see black people as the enemy, instead of understanding that only through attacking white supremacy can we begin to build a human society.
The government has made it clear that it wants control units and intends to keep them. We have to make it clear that this cannot be the case. Every traditional channel has been tried, from the courts to Congress to humanitarian appeals. As the Amnesty International report has documented, the system has failed at every step to guarantee the human rights of the prisoners. Understanding this situation is not enough. Now people must act.
The Committee to End the Marion Lockdown has been working to close control units for almost 3 years. In October of 1985, we held a conference attended by over 300 people to commemorate the second anniversary of the Marion Lockdown. In April of 1986, along with the National Committee to Free Puerto Rican Prisoners of War, we sponsored demonstrations at both Marion and Lexington prisons and forced the prison officials to admit that a control unit would indeed open at Lexington. In the fall of 1986, along with the National Committee, we held a conference to commemorate the third anniversary of the lockdown and sponsored a large demonstration that marched through downtown Chicago during the height of the Christmas shopping season. And in October of 1987, marking 4 years of the lockdown at Marion, we and the National Committee to Free Puerto Rican Prisoners of War co-sponsored a People's Tribunal, where the crimes and human rights violations of Marion Prison and the Lexington Control Unit were exposed.
We have assembled this report and presented it to you today in the belief that many of us can come together and do something about control units and the lockdown. We ask you to join with us to fight against Marion and the entire concept of control units for 3 reasons.
First, it is the ultimate barbarity and its existence not only brutalizes those it incarcerates, but those of us in whose name Marion was built. Second, Marion is a model that will be continued and expanded unless it is stopped, and stopped soon. Third, Marion represents one of the most explicit manifestations of the attempt of white supremacy to sustain itself.
This is a difficult historic period for people who are seeking a new way of living, who are seeking a world free of exploitation. But it is not a hopeless time. We have choices. We can act in the pursuit of our vision. This is what the Committee to End the Marion Lockdown is about. We hope you will join us.